Evelyn Harper's hands trembled as she lit the last candle on the mantel. She whispered the name of her late husband, George, as the flame flickered to life. For 40 years, this tradition had anchored her Christmas Eve candle for every family member, to remind them of the light they brought to one another. But this year, as the candle's warm glow reflected in the antique mirror above the fireplace, Evelyn froze. There, in the mirror, faint silver letters began to appear. Find the light. She staggered back, her heart racing. George's mirror had hung above that mantel for decades, and not once had it done this. "Grandma?" Sophie's small voice broke the stillness. Evelyn turned to see her 5-year-old granddaughter staring up at her with wide eyes. "Is everything okay?" Sophie asked. Evelyn forced a smile, though her pulse thundered in her ears. "Yes, sweetheart, everything's fine." But everything was not fine. As Evelyn stared at the mirror, the letters began to fade, leaving only the reflection of the flickering candles. Was it a trick of the light? A message from George? And why now after all these years? The night outside was calm, but frigid, snow blanketing the streets of Evergreen Lane in silence. Evelyn's house stood at the end of the street, its gabled roof and scalloped shingles crowned with frost. The home looked timeless under the glow of Christmas lights, with every window casting a warm yellow hue onto the snowy yard. Inside, the house was steeped in the smells and sounds of Christmas. The fireplace crackled softly, its heat radiating through the living room. Cinnamon and nutmeg mingled with the scent of fresh pine from the Christmas tree, a towering evergreen bedecked with ornaments that spanned decades. Evelyn had taken care to place each one herself, hand-painted snowflakes from her children's school years, glass globes from her early days with George, and tiny popsicle stick stars made by her grandchildren. The house was filled with reminders of a vibrant past, but it was also weighed down by an undeniable stillness. The mantel, once the heart of the room during Christmas, now seemed to echo with unspoken longing. Its surface held rows of candles, carefully labeled with names: Peter, Angela, Hannah, Will, Emily, Sophie, and George. "Grandma, why do you light the candles every year?" Sophie's voice brought Evelyn back to the present. The little girl had abandoned her coloring to stand by the mantel, gazing up at the flickering flames. Evelyn knelt beside her, smoothing a curl of Sophie's hair. "Each candle is for someone in our family. When I light them, I think about how much light we bring into each other's lives." Sophie tilted her head thoughtfully. "Even Uncle Will, he's always grumpy." Evelyn chuckled, the tension in her chest easing slightly. "Even Uncle Will." She glanced toward the dining room, where the rest of the family sat in varying states of distraction. Peter, her son, spoke in clipped tones on his phone, discussing some last-minute work deal. His wife, Angela, sat nearby, scrolling absently through her emails. Will had claimed the den, his gaming headset crooked on his head as he barked instructions to teammates. Hannah lounged on the couch with her laptop, laughing quietly at something on her screen. Only Emily, chattering enthusiastically about her favorite YouTube star, seemed to be paying any attention to the room around her. Evelyn sighed. She loved her family dearly, but this Christmas felt like all the others in recent years, fractured and distant. Dinner was the same. Evelyn had spent the entire day preparing a feast roast turkey with sage and butter, creamy mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and her famous apple pie. It was a meal she hoped would bring them together. But instead, the table was a patchwork of half-hearted conversations. Evelyn forced a smile as she carved the turkey, but her hands trembled. The warmth of the meal she had prepared all day felt futile, swallowed by the cold indifference at the table. She glanced at George's empty chair, wishing he were there to fill the silence. "So, Peter, are you staying tomorrow? Or do you have to leave right after breakfast?" Evelyn asked, trying to sound casual. Peter looked up briefly from his plate. "I've got a conference call at noon, so we'll head out in the morning. Sorry, Mom." "Conference call? It's Christmas Day," Evelyn said, her voice softer than she intended. Peter shrugged. "The work doesn't stop just because it's a holiday." Angela cleared her throat, clearly trying to steer the conversation away from her husband's brusqueness. "Emily, why don't you tell Grandma about the new dance you learned?" Emily lit up, launching into an explanation of her favorite viral trend, but the table's attention quickly drifted. Will put his headphones back on, and Hannah tapped away on her laptop, her screen's glow reflected in her glasses. Only Sophie remained present, asking Evelyn for seconds of cranberry sauce and telling her about the snowman she'd built earlier that afternoon. Evelyn smiled at Sophie's excitement, but her heart ached. She missed the warmth and connection of the Christmases she and George had created together when Peter was young, and they spent the entire evening laughing, singing carols, and playing games by the fire. Back then, the house was alive with joy. Now, it felt like she was the only one trying to keep the light alive. As the family drifted back to their routines, Evelyn found herself alone by the mantel. She stared at the flickering candles, the weight of the evening pressing down on her. When George had introduced the tradition of lighting candles, it was a way to bring everyone together, to celebrate the light each person brought to their family. "Even when things feel dark," he'd said, "our love is the light that guides us." Now Evelyn wasn't sure if the light was enough. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden flicker from one of the candles. Its flame danced wildly, casting erratic shadows on the wall. Evelyn froze as the antique mirror shimmered again, faint silver letters appearing once more. The attic. Her breath caught. She hadn't been up there in years, not since George passed. "Grandma?" Sophie's voice startled her, and Evelyn turned to see the little girl standing in the doorway. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," Evelyn said, forcing a smile. But as Sophie padded back toward the dining room, Evelyn's heart raced. What could George have left for her in the attic, and why had it chosen this Christmas to call her back? Grabbing the flashlight from the hall, Evelyn cast one last glance at the glowing candles before heading toward the attic door. Evelyn hesitated at the bottom of the attic stairs, her flashlight clutched tightly in her hand. The wooden ladder groaned as she climbed, and each step seemed to echo louder than the last in the stillness of the night. Memories of George flashed through her mind, his gentle laugh, his knack for surprising her with small, meaningful gestures. Now it felt as though he were guiding her once again. The attic door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit space filled with shadows and dust. Evelyn swept the beam of her flashlight across the room, illuminating stacks of boxes, old furniture, and relics of the past. A faded rocking horse sat in one corner, a testament to her children's childhood. An antique phonograph with a tarnished brass horn caught her eye, sitting amid stacks of forgotten boxes. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and Evelyn began to wonder if she had imagined the message. But then her light caught something unusual in the far corner of the attic, a chest she didn't recognize. It was small and unassuming, made of dark wood with the initials GH carved into the lid. "George Harper," she murmured, her voice trembling. Kneeling in front of the chest, Evelyn gently brushed away the thin layer of dust that covered it. The metal latch was slightly rusted, but still functional. With a deep breath, she opened the lid. Inside, she found a bundle of letters tied with a faded red ribbon, a small leather-bound journal, and a delicate gold locket. Her fingers hovered over the items as a wave of emotions surged through her. These were George's keepsakes, preserved like treasures in a time capsule. She picked up the journal, and a folded note slipped out from between the pages. "My dearest Evelyn," the note began in George's familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to hold your hand or light your candle. But I've left you something to remind you of the light we built together, a light that will guide you and our family, even in the darkest times." Look inside the journal. Tears blurred Evelyn's vision as she opened the journal. The pages were filled with George's thoughts, memories, and reflections, some mundane, others deeply profound. He had written about the first Christmas they spent together, the birth of their son, Peter, and the traditions they had created as a family. "I'll never forget the Christmas Sophie insisted on wearing her angel costume all day, even to the dinner table, or how Hannah played piano for hours, making the house sing with life. These moments remind me that love isn't in grand gestures, but in the light we bring to one another, even when we don't realize it. On one page, he had drawn a simple map with a set of coordinates circled in red. Beneath it, he had written, "For all of us. Trust me." "What are you doing up here, Grandma?" The voice startled Evelyn, and she turned to see Emily standing in the doorway, clutching her phone like a security blanket. Her curious gaze flitted from the chest to the journal in Evelyn's lap. "Oh, sweetheart, I didn't hear you come in," Evelyn said, quickly wiping her eyes. Emily stepped closer. "Are you okay? I heard a noise and thought you might need help." Evelyn hesitated, then held out the journal. "I found something your grandpa left for us. Would you like to help me figure it out?" Emily's eyes widened with interest, her usual preteen aloofness momentarily replaced by genuine curiosity. "Really? What is it?" Evelyn showed her the map and explained the coordinates. "It looks like he wanted us to find something together, but I'll need everyone's help to do it." By morning, the chest and its contents had become the focus of the family's attention. Evelyn had gathered everyone in the living room, the journal open on the coffee table. "This is ridiculous," Peter said, rubbing his temples as he stared at the map. "You're telling me Dad left a treasure hunt for us? Why didn't he mention it before he died?" "Maybe it was something he decided later," Angela offered, though her tone was skeptical. She looked up from her phone for once, her brow furrowed. "Do we even know if this is still there? It's been years." "It doesn't matter," Evelyn interjected firmly. "George left this for a reason. He always believed in bringing us together, especially at Christmas. This might be his way of doing that." Sophie tugged at Evelyn's sleeve. "Grandma, what's at the X on the map?" "We don't know yet, darling," Evelyn replied, smoothing the little girl's hair. "But that's why we need to go find out." "I think it's cool," Emily said, surprising everyone. "It's like one of those escape room challenges, but in real life." Hannah scoffed. "Great, a scavenger hunt in the middle of nowhere. Just what I wanted for Christmas." "Don't be so negative," Emily shot back. "It's not like you were doing anything important anyway." "Enough," Peter said, raising his voice slightly. He looked at his mother, then at the journal. "If this is so important to you, we'll do it. But I don't want anyone getting their hopes up. It's probably just another sentimental gesture." Evelyn felt a pang at his words, but nodded. "Thank you, Peter. That's all I ask." Later that day, the family piled into 2 cars, navigating snowy roads toward the location marked on George's map. The coordinates led them to a small clearing on the edge of town, nestled within a grove of towering fir trees. The sunlight filtering through the branches created a golden haze, and the snow underfoot crunched with every step. Evelyn led the way, clutching the journal as if it were a compass. Sophie held her hand tightly, while Emily trailed behind, filming the journey on her phone. Hannah trudged behind, glancing occasionally at her phone as though debating whether to break the habit that had numbed her loneliness during long hours of schoolwork. Will kept pace with the group, the headphones slung around his neck, a reminder of the gaming worlds he escaped to when family gatherings became too tense. Peter and Angela followed more reluctantly, their skepticism evident. In the center of the grove stood an old stone bench, half buried in snow. Evelyn's breath hitched as she recognized it. "This was our special spot," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "George proposed to me here." The family exchanged glances, their skepticism softening slightly. On the bench sat a small wooden box, its lid engraved with a starburst design. Hannah frowned. "How is this still here? Wouldn't it have been ruined by the weather?" "It must have been hidden," Peter said, brushing off snow and picking it up. "Looks like Dad left it here for someone to find eventually." Evelyn carefully opened the box. Inside was a single white candle, along with another note in George's handwriting. "Light this candle together, and you'll find the way." The family stood in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. "What do you think it means?" Emily asked, breaking the silence. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she held the candle. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I think we're meant to do this together." Peter shook his head, his skepticism returning. "Mom, this is starting to sound like some sort of game." "Maybe it is," Evelyn said softly. But sometimes games can teach us things we've forgotten. George wouldn't have left this unless it was important. As the family debated what to do next, Sophie pointed to the journal. Grandpa said the light will guide us. Maybe we just need to trust him. Evelyn smiled down at her youngest granddaughter, her heart swelling with hope. You're right, Sophie. Let's light the candle. The family huddled together, shielding the flame from the wind as Evelyn struck a match. The candle's glow was small but steady, and as it burned, its light reflected off the snowy landscape, illuminating something they hadn't noticed before. A faint pathway leading deeper into the woods. "Do you see that?" Hannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn nodded, her pulse quickening. "Let's follow it." The faint path through the snow wound deeper into the grove, illuminated by the candle's flickering glow. It wasn't a natural trail. The snow lay undisturbed except for the shimmering reflection of the flame. Evelyn clutched the candle tightly, its warmth seeping into her hands and fortifying her resolve. Peter stepped beside her, scanning the woods with a skeptical eye. "This doesn't make any sense. It's like the light is pointing the way." "Maybe that's the point," Evelyn said softly, her gaze fixed ahead. "Sometimes the things we can't explain are the ones that matter most." Behind them, the rest of the family followed hesitantly. Sophie clung to Emily's coat, her small boots crunching loudly against the snow. Will had his headphones dangling around his neck, his phone forgotten for once, as he watched the scene unfold with wary curiosity. Even Hannah, who usually exuded an air of perpetual boredom, looked intrigued despite herself. As they walked, the air seemed to grow heavier, quieter, as though the world were holding its breath. Angela shivered, pulling her scarf tighter. "Does anyone else feel like we're being watched?" "It's just the trees," Peter replied gruffly, though his furrowed brow betrayed his unease. Evelyn, however, felt something else entirely a presence, warm and familiar, like the comforting embrace of a loved one long gone. After what felt like an eternity, the family emerged into a small clearing. In the center stood a large fir tree, its branches heavy with snow. Hanging from one of the lower limbs was a lantern, its glass panes frosted with age. Evelyn approached cautiously, holding the candle out to light the lantern's wick. As the lantern flared to life, its warm glow revealed a plaque embedded in the tree's trunk. Evelyn leaned closer, brushing away the snow. The engraving read, "When the light is shared, the path becomes clear." "What does that mean?" Emily asked, her phone raised to record the inscription. "It's a puzzle," Hannah muttered, crossing her arms. "Grandpa loved this kind of stuff." Evelyn stepped back, studying the lantern. "It means we need to light something else." She turned to the family. "Each of you brought a candle from the mantel, didn't you?" They exchanged reluctant glances before pulling their candles from pockets and bags. Evelyn took a deep breath, steadying herself. "We need to light them all together." Peter frowned. "Is this really necessary? What are we even looking for?" Evelyn met his gaze, her voice firm. "George wanted us to do this as a family. That's all I know. Please, Peter, trust me." Reluctantly, Peter struck another match, and one by one, they lit their candles from the lantern's flame. As the final candle caught fire, the ground beneath their feet began to shimmer. A series of golden lights, like tiny fireflies, appeared in the snow, forming another path that led away from the clearing. "Now what?" Will asked, his voice tinged with awe. Evelyn smiled. "We follow." Hannah had always teased Will mercilessly when they were kids. But in recent years, their conversations had dwindled to sarcastic barbs or brief holiday greetings. Hannah fell into step beside Will as the family moved forward. She glanced at him, her voice quieter than usual. "I don't think I've really talked to you all year, you know." Will shrugged, but looked at her out of the corner of his eye. "Yeah, same. I guess I've been busy. You too." "Yeah." She hesitated, then added, "But maybe we shouldn't be, too busy for this stuff. You know, family." Will nodded slowly, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Yeah, maybe we shouldn't." Hannah smiled faintly. "Cool, just don't get weird about it." Will snorted, a small grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. The family moved as one, the candles casting a warm glow against the encroaching twilight. The new path led them to a frozen pond, its surface shimmering like glass under the light of the lanterns. At the edge of the pond stood another bench, similar to the one in the grove, but this one bore a different inscription. "Look beneath the surface to see the truth." "It's the pond," Hannah said, her tone unusually serious. "There's something under the ice." "Are we supposed to break it?" Will asked, already stomping one foot experimentally on the edge of the ice. "Don't!" Angela snapped, pulling him back. "You'll fall in!" Evelyn knelt at the edge of the pond, her candle reflected in the pristine ice. "No, we don't break it. We look." She leaned closer, her breath fogging the surface. Slowly, as the candlelight danced across the ice, shapes began to emerge. At first, it was nothing more than shadows, but then the shapes clarified, forming an image etched into the ice itself. It was a family, their faces aglow with joy, gathered around a roaring fire. Evelyn recognized them instantly. "It's us," she whispered. The others crowded closer, their faces mirrored in the ice. Sophie pointed excitedly. "There's Grandpa!" Sure enough, George's familiar smile shone back at them from the frozen surface. He stood at the center of the family, holding a candle high. For a moment, no one moved. Peter's eyes filled with unspoken regret. Angela's hands trembled as she reached for her husband's arm, and even Will wiped at his eyes under the pretense of adjusting his scarf. Each saw themselves in the reflection, a piece of the joy they had forgotten. Angela's voice wavered. How is this possible?" "It's a memory," Evelyn said, tears welling in her eyes. "The Christmas before George passed. He wanted us to remember this moment." Peter looked down at the image, his jaw tightening. "I was barely here that year. I spent most of the night on work calls. And I kept shushing the kids so I could scroll through Instagram," Angela added quietly. Hannah frowned. "I think I was in my room the whole time." Will shifted uncomfortably. "I don't even remember it." Evelyn's voice was soft but firm. "This is what George was trying to show us, how much we've drifted apart, but we can still change that." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sounds were the faint rustle of the wind and the crackle of the lantern's flame. The silence was broken by Sophie's small voice. "Can we take Grandpa home?" Evelyn smiled through her tears. "He's already home, sweetheart. He's in all of us." The family lingered at the edge of the pond, their reflections mingling with the frozen memory beneath them. For the first time in years, they truly looked at one another, not as individuals caught up in their own lives, but as a family. The path of golden lights shimmered again, leading them back toward the grove. Evelyn held Sophie's hand as they walked, her heart lighter than it had been in years. As the family reached the clearing, the lantern dimmed, and the golden lights faded into the snow. The bench was empty now, the box and its contents gone, as though they had never been there. "What now?" Emily asked, glancing nervously at the sky where stars were beginning to appear. Evelyn smiled, her gaze drifting back to the house. "Now we take the light with us, and we make this Christmas one we'll never forget." As they approached the house, the candles flickered once more, casting their warm glow against the snow. For a brief moment, Evelyn thought she saw George's silhouette in the window, his hand resting on the mantel where the candles had first been lit. But when she blinked, the figure was gone. Back inside the house, the family shed their coats and boots, shaking off the cold as they crowded into the living room. The atmosphere had shifted subtly. The quiet tension that had lingered over the past few days was replaced with a tentative warmth. The candles on the mantel still burned brightly, their steady flames casting golden light across the room. Evelyn sat down heavily on the couch, Sophie climbing up beside her. She held the journal on her lap, flipping through its pages with trembling fingers. "George always believed in the power of traditions," she murmured. "Not just for the sake of doing them, but because they bring us together. That's what all of this was about." Peter leaned against the fireplace, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "It's more than that, Mom," he said, his voice softer than usual. "He was reminding us of what we've lost. Somewhere along the way, we stopped being us." Angela nodded, her gaze fixed on the glowing candles. "I think we all let life get in the way. Work, school, everything else. We stopped making time for each other." Will, uncharacteristically quiet, sat on the arm of a chair. "I barely remember that Christmas by the pond, but looking at it, I kinda wish I had paid more attention." Hannah set her phone on the coffee table, a rare moment of surrender. "Me too. I've spent so much time wanting to be somewhere else, but now I feel like I've been missing the point." Evelyn smiled at them, her heart swelling with pride and hope. "It's not too late, my loves. We can start again." George believed that no matter how far apart we drift, there's always a way back. The room grew quiet, the kind of silence that feels full rather than empty. Then Sophie's small voice broke through. "Grandma, can we sing?" "Sing what, sweetheart?" Evelyn asked gently. "The song Grandpa used to like. The candle one," Sophie replied, her face earnest. For a moment, Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Sophie meant Silent Night. It was George's favorite carol, one he insisted they sing every Christmas Eve by candlelight. The family had long abandoned the tradition, too busy or disinterested to carry it on. Evelyn nodded, wiping away a tear. "Yes, darling, let's sing." Evelyn stood, taking one of the candles from the mantel. She passed it to Peter, who lit it with his own. Slowly, each family member took a candle, the flames spreading until the room glowed with warmth and light. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the candles on the mantel. She had carried this tradition for decades, lighting candles year after year, hoping to rekindle the closeness her family once shared. But as the years passed, her hope had dimmed. Would this be the year the light truly reached them? Or was she clinging to a dream that had long since slipped away? Her gaze lingered on the mirror, now still and silent. The memory of George's voice filled her mind, soft but steady. Even when it feels impossible, love is the light that guides us. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn picked up the first candle. Evelyn began to sing, her voice steady and strong despite the lump in her throat. "Silent night, holy night?" Peter joined in, his deep baritone blending with his mother's voice. Then Angela, hesitant at first, added her soft alto. Emily, Will, and Hannah exchanged glances before their voices rose timidly to meet the melody. Finally, Sophie's high, sweet voice carried the song like a star piercing the night sky. For the first time in years, they sang as one, their voices weaving together like threads in a tapestry. The flames of the candles flickered and danced, casting shimmering reflections on the windows and walls. As the final notes of the carol faded, the candles glowed brighter for a brief moment, their light pooling in the mirror above the mantel. This time, the reflection didn't form words, but an image. The family gasped. There, in the mirror, was George. He stood smiling in the reflection, his hand resting on Evelyn's shoulder. His eyes sparkled with pride, and though his figure was faint, his presence felt unmistakably real. "George," Evelyn whispered, tears streaming down her face. The family stared in awe. George's figure raised a hand in a gentle wave, his expression one of peace and joy. Slowly the light faded, and the image dissolved, leaving only the golden glow of the candles behind. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Peter broke the silence. "That wasn't just the light playing tricks, was it?" "No," Evelyn said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "That was George. He wanted us to see him, to know he's still with us." Angela reached for Peter's hand, and to Evelyn's surprise, he didn't pull away. Instead, he held it tightly, his gaze fixed on the mantel. "He brought us back," Peter said softly. Evelyn nodded. "He always knew what we needed, even when we didn't." The rest of the evening felt like a new beginning. The family lingered in the living room, sharing stories of George and reminiscing about past Christmases. Will showed Sophie how to build a block tower, and Emily helped Angela bake a fresh batch of cookies. Hannah put her phone away entirely, joining Evelyn at the piano to pick out the melody of another carol. Peter sat beside his mother, his hand resting on hers. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said after a long silence. for being so distant. I've been so focused on everything else that I forgot what really matters." Evelyn smiled, her fingers curling around his. "It's never too late, Peter. That's the beauty of family. We're always here for each other, no matter how much time has passed." Angela, sitting nearby, set her phone aside for the first time that evening. "She's right, Peter. And Evelyn, I've been so caught up in my own world that I haven't taken the time to thank you for everything, for keeping us together, even when we've made it so hard." She glanced at the candles, her expression softening. "This tradition, it's beautiful, and we need it now more than ever." Evelyn's smile grew, her heart swelling at Angela's sincerity. As the night drew to a close, Evelyn placed the journal back in the chest and set it near the mantel. The candles still burned, their flames steady and unwavering. She turned to the family, who were gathered around the tree now, marveling at Sophie's enthusiastic gift wrapping and Emily's ambitious ornament redesigns. "Let's make a promise," Evelyn said, her voice carrying an air of quiet determination. The family looked up. "Every year, we'll light these candles together," she continued. "Not just for tradition's sake, but to remind ourselves of the light we bring to each other. The light George helped us find." Peter nodded, his eyes glassy. "I think that's a promise we can all keep." One by one, the others agreed, their voices filled with sincerity. Later, as Evelyn prepared for bed, she paused at the mantel. The house was quiet now, the family asleep in their rooms, but the candles still burned brightly. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw George's reflection again, his familiar smile lighting up the glass. "Thank you, my love," she whispered. As she turned away, Evelyn felt a peace she hadn't known in years. George's light had done more than guide them, it had rekindled the love that had always been there, waiting beneath the surface. The flames flickered gently in response, and Evelyn felt a warmth in her heart that no winter chill could touch. As she blew out the last candle, she carried its light within her, knowing it would burn brightly in the hearts of her family for years to come.